Thanks so much for joining us today, Jason. How are you?
Busy. Happy to be getting out of this crazy quarantine. I'm going to take a trip, and yeah, maybe even do a business trip or go see other people. I'm just really excited that science and entrepreneurship, dare I say, capitalism, is getting us out of this mess that the communists created. So once again, capitalism saving the world from communism.
Yeah, I think you literally just tweeted about that. So, look, I'm excited to dive deep into a lot of different things with you today. And the truth is, I'm grateful that you're here and we have a lot to cover. And what I love to do with people is really just look at their career journey and understand how they got to where they are. Many
Yep.
people know Jason as the angel investor, the poker player, the podcast lover, and you have done so much. But I know that most people, especially 30, 40 years ago, didn't necessarily wake up thinking,
Mhm.
I want to be an angel investor. So I'm curious back in the day what you actually thought you were going to do with your career. And then essentially, if you can kind of shed light on how you jumped into the media world, and then we'll kind of go from there.
So I started as an IT person, and yeah, as an IT person, I was there when dial up and people were using online services, and I was fascinated by that. While I was in college, somebody showed me BitNet, which was the precursor to the internet, along with ARPANET, and like sort of the university system. And I was just enamored by that. This is before the World Wide Web existed. And then I saw the browser, and still working in IT, and I just happened to stumble into an opportunity where somebody told me a magazine publisher was start wanted to start a magazine about DVDs and CD-ROMs, and I was like, yeah, the better idea would be to do these online services and maybe even like the internet. It was 1994, and so I happened to, back in that era, the 90s, if you wanted to be heard, starting a magazine or something called a zine was how you became prominent and had a voice. To get on TV was very hard. There was no internet. Online services were nascent. They were only used by low millions of people in the world. So it was magazines or maybe being on the local news or a newscaster. It really wasn't a lot of options. Oh, journalist was, I guess, another one, working for a magazine or newspaper. So long story short, I got that gig with Starlog, Starlog, a guy named Norm. Forgot his last name. Anyway, this guy who had started this wanted me to start Cyber Surfer. Wanted me to start a magazine. I said, "Well, I want to do Cyber Surfer." He's like, "What's that?" Is like cyber is like cyberpunk, like Blade Runner, and Surfer. So my name on the internet was Cyber Surfer, like Silver Surfer from the comic books combined with cyber. And so I was the Cyber Surfer. I started the magazine, did 5 issues. Then I got in a fight with the publisher because I had registered the trademark, and he thought he owned the magazine because he gave me $5,000 to produce every episode. And I hired Brian Alvey as my art director and a bunch of friends to write for it. And the total budget was 5,000 episode an issue, and we were working full time in IT, and we did it at night. But I didn't know how to do a magazine. But I had in my mind I wanted to be rich and powerful and influential, and I just thought magazines were the best way to do that. And when I had that opportunity, I just jumped at it, and I pitched him hard on it, and he said yes. It did pretty well, and then we did a cover story called "The 100 Best Websites in the World." And I don't know where I got that crazy idea, but I thought this would be really interesting. We just reviewed the top 100 websites in the world because there were only 1,000 or 2,000 websites at the time. So it's sort of like reviewing the top 5% of books. Long story short, that didn't work out. He wound up suing me. The whole thing collapsed. And I wasn't really even incorporated. I just personally trademarked a name. I then started Silicon Alley Reporter, which started as a zine, and that's when my career really started. And I was covering explicitly startups in the technology internet space. And that's where I made my name for myself.
That's awesome. I think a lot of people listening are probably wondering, look, you kind of dove into this, you had clear ambition, right? You
Yeah.
had this innate drive that most people have, and it sometimes kind of finagles back and forth whether or not it remains there. But no matter what happened, I think throughout your career,
Mhm.
many successful people, oftentimes nobody sees the hardships and what happened in those moments. So I think early on, If you look back, what was difficult in those moments? Because I think in today's world, if we think through kind of the Gen Z millennial, people are jumping around from job to job. And I think you went from one event to a different event and you're kind of going through different types of publications as well.
Mm.
What was that experience like for you? And how do you kind of maintain that mindset through that process?
Well, my mindset at the time was just adrenaline and to try to accomplish things and just work really hard and add skills because I just thought I want to learn how to be a designer, a writer, a magazine publisher, a salesperson, a software engineer. I just wanted to do everything. And so I had an innate desire to not be poor, to be rich, to not be unknown, to be famous, to not be um, weak, but to be powerful. And I just put all my energy into that, and I don't think that was particularly healthy and probably had some edge effects. But the upside of it was I was so ambitious that anytime there was an opportunity, I pursued it. And I just was relentless about it. I was dogged. And had a little chip on my shoulder. So that worked out well for me. Not everybody has that kind of motivation to just be successful. But looking back on it, I think I did have that craziness to my personality. And
I think we need a little bit of crazy to get to where you've gotten, and obviously, kind of the career path that you've created for yourself. If I may ask, where did that chip come from?
probably, growing up in Brooklyn in the 70s and into the 80s, it was a little bit rough and tumble. And um, you had to be a fighter to just survive. And I mean, I'm not trying to make it out like it wasn't Mogadishu, but people got their asses handed to them on a pretty regular basis. Crimes were being committed. We were bad kids. Like things were a little gnarly and challenging. And I, got in a lot of fights and got suspended. And then I had a teacher who was my science teacher in high school, and I was getting kicked out of high school, and my mom was pretty upset about it. But they let me stay in the high school if I kept doing taekwondo, or if I joined the taekwondo club, because they knew that it would have a good influence on me. I joined the taekwondo club, and I wound up becoming a black belt by the time I was a senior in high school, and ran the New York City Marathon, and just became very disciplined as an individual. So, I had a weird combination of, I think, fearfulness and powerlessness as a child growing up in Brooklyn. And then I combined it with confidence and martial arts and achievement. And I guess that achievement of going from a white belt to a yellow to green, purple, brown, black, second degree, third degree, all the way to sixth degree, which is what I am now. In those early years, that was very formative for me, and leveling up, as it were. And then when I became a young adult, I just wanted to keep leveling up my skills. I just wanted to, always be, um, you know, uh, a predator, not the prey kind of situation. Like, um, and that can have other weird impact, on your life and
Yeah.
friendships and relationships and all kinds of other stuff. But I was a fighter. And I went from kind of being a brawler to a samurai in my mind, just a little more elegant about how I did things. Yeah, and it drove me pretty hard.
I love that, and thanks for sharing that because I think oftentimes people see a persona, they hear a voice, and they see the accomplishments, but not often do you hear kind of what drives the individual. And that's really the impetus of anybody's life and legacy and whatever they want to create throughout their adulthood and career. I'm curious, kind of after you went from those early days of publication, you jumped into some level of investing. I know that kind of poker in general has had a pretty big impact on your life and it kind of dictates how you think a little bit as well. Can you share a little bit about how you kind of got into the early days of investing and what that transition was like? It's not that you stopped doing media, but you expanded what you were focused on.
Yeah. So when I was in New York, I was in a poker group. It was just an excuse for people to get together on Tuesdays and play poker. My friend Adeo Ressi, who does the Founders Institute, had it. I just developed a lot of friendships there and kept those friendships to this day. Yeah. In fact, Tony Shea, who passed away this past year, was part of our poker group in New York and Vegas and wherever we played. And we had, like an email list, and We called it the list, the Tuesday list. And anyway, long story short, this was, some good friendships, but it really wasn't about poker. Then I moved to LA. When I lived in LA, poker was like a sport. And there was a lot of socialization going around it, and tech, business, Hollywood, everybody was playing cards, and it was a lot of fun. Um, and learned quickly, and was invited to all those Molly games with all those celebrities. Didn't go. Molly would, like, the woman from Molly's game, Molly would like literally text me like, "Oh, I'm having a game. Leo's here. This, Toby's here. This person's here, and they want to see you." And I was like, I think they want to see me lose 50 grand. But then Chamath played poker, and Chamath and I knew each other from AOL. We started playing cards together. He introduced me to Phil Hellmuth. Phil Hellmuth and I are friends. Bill Gurley and Sky Dayton would come to my poker game. We would do at the D conference. So really, Sky Dayton and I invited Bill and Mark Pincus, and then we had done it at this conference in somebody's hotel room, and it just became like something we wound up doing for 20 years. So I met a lot of my friends there. But just in terms of the game is very important for, I think, entrepreneurs or people who are investors to play, because when you're an investor, you have to make decisions with a limited amount of information, partial information. When you're playing poker, I know what cards I have, but I don't know what cards you have or the other 7 or 8 people sitting at the table. Therefore, I have to make some assumptions. I can make those assumptions based on reading you body language. I can make them based on math. I can make them based upon your previous play. I could make them based on how you react to me making a bet or not making a bet, or raising you or folding, whatever, over time. And so there's intimidation, deception, math, logic, situational awareness, emotion. And there's a lot of things that are going on in the game that I think make it a really great thing for people to learn how to play. And when I got a chance to become an investor, because a friend of mine who worked at Sequoia Capital, Rulov Botha, said, "Hey, would you like to be a scout for us?" And I said, "What's a scout?" He's like, "You invest our money. We split it 50-50." And I was like, "Okay." And I became a scout for them and made 17 investments that became worth well more than $100 million. And we got to split that money, which is pretty cool. Then, I realized I'm pretty good at this investing thing, and I still do media. I do my podcast 5 days a week now. It makes a couple $1 million, a lot of fun. It's a way for This Week in Startups I'm talking about. It's a way for me to feature folks on the podcast who I've invested in, or meet folks who then I wind up investing in. That's how calm.com happened. And, it's investing in startups, very similar to poker, but not exact. And you really have to play a lot of hands in order to learn how to play. And I'm up to, 250 to 300 investments now. And so I'm starting to figure it out.
You've done quite well for yourself. And the truth is, what I love about your kind of perspective on poker and investing is there's a lot of psychology involved there. So I'm curious, without giving away too much, I know you have your academy and you've done a great job building that out. But when you teach people to kind of look through the poker lens and look at investing, what is it that you're specifically looking at in individuals, in founders, that really tells you yay or nay, or is there more depth to it?
Yeah, I wrote a book about this angel 3 years ago, and it's really just explains my entire system. There's really not much secret to it, except that there are 3 things that drive a startup, and the team, the product, and the customers. And if you have a team that can build a great product and they have product velocity, in other words, if you're investing in them and it's January, or you're meeting with them in January and you are going to confirm the investment in March, did anything change between those 90 days or 60 days? When you see the product changing and evolving and they have product velocity and it's a well-crafted product, now they're good at product. So you have a team that's good at product. Okay, so now what does that team with that product need? It needs a customer. And that customer you can talk to. So if you find a team, great, then determine if they make a great product. Forget about how they present themselves for a moment. Pretend you didn't even meet them. Pretend that they're, the cast of Silicon Valley, the HBO show. Just put out of your mind whatever you learned about them and just look at the product. Then, if you determine this product is good, it's well crafted, and people are using it, then you can talk to those users. If you talk to those users or customers, users don't pay, customers do. Paying is a really good signal, obviously, because you have skin in the game. If those customers are delighted and you ask them, like, how would you feel if this product went away? I mean, it's pretty easy to determine. If they said, well, I'd go back to using Excel, and you're like, okay, so if Google Sheets went away, you just use Excel. So yeah, it's like, okay, tells you everything you know. It's a commodity product. But if they said, like, what? It's the product shutting down. Can I buy the source code, or can I be an investor? Or wait, why are you shutting down? I'll pay you more money. Then you know, like, you have a really passionate user base who's actually getting value from it. That's the flywheel. If the founder or founders can then stay focused on the product and the customers, they will be able to charge more and or have more customers. If they charge more and they have more customers, it means they're providing more value, and thus the cycle continues. If you look at Netflix, it's gotten better and better and better every year. Why? Well, they're getting better at what they do. They make more money and they put it into content, and they have their whole archive of content. The idea that somebody would stop paying for Netflix, like a family or something, is crazy. Same thing with Disney. Like, why would I give all that up? It's too good. So really, that is the secret to investing. And the problem is, new investors make a series of mistakes. They invest in a founder they know through, like, their network. Well, their network is not startup founders, so they're finding some rando, which is fine. Randos can change the world. Zuckerberg was a rando. Bill Gates was a rando at some point. They both came from affluent families, actually, but the random stuff does happen. Putting that aside, if the company is coming to you, somebody who's never invested in a company before, it tells you something. They couldn't clear market with any of the, I don't want to say real investors, but the established investors would be the right word to use. And so you're kind of seeing a negative signal. Whatever inventory is left are the worst apples from the entire bushel. When there's one apple there and the other 49 apples are missing in that bushel of 50, what does that tell you about the last apple? Might be bruised, might have a worm in it, could have been manhandled, it's whatever. So those are things I teach people at Angel University, which is a course I teach 4 times a year. I used to do it in person. Now I just do it online. And all the proceeds for that go to charity. And it's been going very well.
That's great. And I appreciate you walking us through that. I think a big luxury that you end up getting is a front row seat with founders that go on to build successful companies. There's a variety of them that I think are public, right? Between Robinhood, Wealthfront, Uber, the notorious one. What I'm curious to learn really is, as you get that front row seat and we look at the ever changing culture with people jumping around from job to job, what do you talk about and what do you really kind of try to instill in the culture? Do you really let the founders kind of drive everything themselves? Because what
Yeah,
we're looking,
founders have to run their own companies. I don't get involved in the running of the companies. I'm there for the founder as counsel, consigliere, friend, partner. They need help, they call me. So if they don't know how to do culture, I can point them to a couple of books about culture. I can say, hey, or you should talk to these 2 founders who have really great cultures. But I try not to set anything about the startup. That would be like, if I was hiring an actor and I'm a director or a producer, like, or if I hire a director or a screenplay writer, like, I could give them notes, I guess. But in a lot of cases, they have to make the movie themselves, right? And so for me to get involved then would corrupt their vision. And I really don't want to be doing that, because what if I'm wrong? And some VCs don't have a problem with this. I'll be on the board of a company and they're just like, you should do this. And it's like, there was a VC who was telling Tesla they should not make cars. They should sell components to other car manufacturers. If Tesla had taken that advice, I think that was from Vantage Partners or some idiots, they wouldn't be here. There would be no electric cars right now.
yeah. So let me maybe reframe that a little bit. You've had, as you said, kind of the vantage point of 250, 300 startups. There's clearly been some successful ones. What do you think they do as a leadership team to really create a good culture that inspires great talent to come on board and retain that talent as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. For me, I like people who can learn new skills very quickly, who take ownership. And I was very impacted by the two books about freedom and responsibility at Netflix. I think these are really important for people to read. And in fact, I've been working on my next book, which will have, my thoughts on some of this stuff, which is basically there are people who want a job in life and they want security. And then there are people on the other side who, maybe they want advancement, and that's okay. These are two different moments in time. So, I have family members who, right now at this moment in time, they're thinking about retirement. They're thinking about their pension or their 401k. Is there a way for me to get extra health care? And that's all valid and great. In startup land, you might be looking to optimize for people who are more ambitious than 9 to 5. That doesn't mean you can't have 9 to 5ers at your company. You can have those people who are clock punchers at a startup. It's just generally that it creates a culture clash in that people who come to certain cultures are looking for advancement. So I literally wrote a blog post about this, and then I decided I would just make it a landing page. So if you go to howtogetajobinvc.com, I literally was like, you know what? I always wanted to understand how you got that job. And I figured I'd just codify it in how you can get that job with me, which is you could spend $250,000 going to Harvard Business School, Stanford Business, Graduate School Business. That's a valid way. And that's how most people get their job in venture traditionally, is going to a world-class Wharton Business School, et cetera. And then they still have to fight to get that seat and put in a decade to get to partner, or maybe even 2. The second way to really get in is to be rich and just be an angel investor, or be an accredited investor and make 20 investments on your own and hit one. And then maybe you have enough experience. I outline that in my book, Angel, how, people with 20, 30, 40 angel investments do get recruited to work at venture firms because they've already established they can do the job, and they can do that for as little as 5, 10K per deal. In other words, if you were doing 10K per deal and you did 25 deals, again, $250,000, boom, you're qualified. But still $250,000. So I realized, if you hire a researcher for $45,000 or $50,000 a year out of school, and you mentor them, and then they eventually become like an analyst or an associate, and they make $60,000 or $70,000. If you put that 4 years together at an average of 60-ish K, that's $250,000. So why don't I create that career path? Spend $250K of your own money investing in companies. Pretty good idea if you have the money. And you could do that over 5 years, 50,000 a year. If you were making 200,000, you might be able to figure out a way to do that. But not everybody can do that. Or spend 250,000 going into debt for a graduate degree, or come work for me. And so, what I just basically told everybody is I expect the attrition rate to be about 50%. And I just look for people to do a fixed 50, a solid 60 hours a week in finance. But you have to also be incredibly responsive, because in this job, you're kind of like an on-call physician where, you don't get to be a brain surgeon and get paid all that money, or an emergency cosmetic surgeon who has to do people who've tragically gotten injured or whatever, and they try to, repair people who've been in accidents. There's certain jobs that you are just available. You're on call. Being a venture capitalist and investor, you're on call. You don't get to be in a finance position and not be on call. I know people would like to think that, and most of the time you're not having to work at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night. But there'll be times that a deal is falling apart and it's 11 p.m. on a Saturday night, and you're planning to go to the next bar, and you got to get home and you got to get in front of a computer and close a deal, or else you're going to lose it to the next firm. So hard work, being on call, being responsive, and then adding new skills to your stack, and really having this great talent stack is super important. And how quickly can you learn is something I look at. So I like to just take people who work for me and just throw them in the deep end of the pool and throw them a cinder block and be like, here, like the Navy SEALs do, and just, okay, you've never done this software before? Great, do it. Make a website, make a type form, figure out Notion, run an event on Hopin or AirMeet or whatever event platform. Just really push people to learn. And I am consistently delighted that the people who come work for me, and that's a self-selecting group, really do take to heart this idea of continuing to advance your career and your skill set and your talent stack, and to read books. Now, I've had other people work for me who are kind of socialist, clock punchers. And I remember one conversation, I was like, you really need to read this book. We're going to have a book club in 2 Monday nights. And the person was like, can I get paid overtime? Because I don't want to read that book. And I want you to pay me to. And I was like,
To read a
okay,
book?
I guess I could pay you to read the Netflix culture book, but why are you here working for me if you want to get paid overtime to read a book that's going to help you? That would be like, I don't know, you pick an analogy, but it's pretty crazy, right? And so that person no longer works for me. It's just not a fit, right? I need people who are just going to put in 60 hours a week. I'm not asking for 90 or 100 like Goldman Sachs, but Goldman Sachs, you're going to make millions of dollars a year. So maybe there is an, or eventually you could make that, and you're going to make probably 200,000 a year going in. So they want to self-select people out of it who are not hardcore and willing to sacrifice.
Hey, you could certainly make millions of dollars with Jason. It just takes hard work and discipline. My parents certainly didn't leave the Soviet Union to kind of work the party lines and go the socialist route. So it's definitely instilled in me. But I know a lot of people don't necessarily have that luxury. They don't want that. They don't operate that way. You did allude to this new book that you're writing. I'm curious if you can kind of give us a sneak peek on what the second version of Jason's endeavor into writing books is going to look like.
Basically, the advice I would have given myself at the start of my career is I don't have a title, I don't have it all worked out, but just a way for people to advance their careers faster and to become successful faster, how to take 10 or 20 years out of your career path. So that's basically the concept.
What are
In a
some of
nutshell.
what are some of the takeaways? Maybe 2, 3 examples.
Well, we talked about some of them, like adding to your talent stack and taking on additional projects. So I always tell people, like, there is a moment in time where some employee or team member, I should say, comes to you and says, can I get paid overtime to read the book that you recommended? And then there's the opposite moment where somebody says, hey, boss, I saw that you were doing this thing, this new project. Is there any way I can help on that? And I say, yeah. And here, work on this. And then I come in on Monday morning or Sunday night, they send me something. And I'm like, oh, well, that's delightful. I didn't anticipate you were going to work on that off hours and get us an edge on our competitors to do something new, right? And unique in the world. So I'm constantly looking to have an edge or an advantage over the other people who we're competing against. And I think if you look at your career and you look at your company as being in competition and it being zero sum, which people say it's not zero sum and you're only competing against yourself. And I guess that's one way to look at the world and to frame it. Another way to look at it is there's a limited amount of resources. There's a limited amount of great startups in the world, and we need to get on the cap tables of them. So we want to out hustle and outwork the other firms. Or, there's a limited number of people who they're either going to use Zoom or Microsoft Teams, or they're going to use GoToMeeting or WebEx or Cisco, Skype, Google Hangouts. We want them to use Zoom. How do we make Zoom that much better that we beat Google Hangouts? And the fact that Google Hangouts, Skype, WebEx, Cisco all had this new entree into the space, Zoom, go supernova during the pandemic, tells you something. There's always room for a new competitor to come in and to win. And I think it's very instructive, and people should really think about that deeply. The example of Zoom coming in and beating other people. And it has to do with a hustle. That company just was dogged, and they out hustled Google Hangouts, and they embarrassed Google Hangouts, and they embarrassed Skype. The fact that Skype and Google Hangouts don't work as good as Zoom, given the resources that Google and Microsoft has, is pathetic. I think since they got their butts kicked by Zoom coming in, they've really started to make those products better. But how crummy does Skype and Google Hangouts seem compared to Cisco's product line or Zoom's, right? I mean, I do think Cisco's is on par with Zoom's, but most people don't have access to Cisco's stack of products.
Yeah, certainly. So what I'm hearing is curiosity, critical thinking, and the hustle is really what's going to outpace a lot of people, and that's what you love in your environment, in your
Curiosity,
ecosystem.
I'm not so sure about. That seems pretty weak to me. I mean, Yeah, I mean, sure, being curious is interesting, but I would rather be dogged and resilient and hardworking than curious.
Okay.
Curious and, you know, everybody's a winner, participation trophies, all this stuff. I think like people get a lot of bad advice to pursue their dreams and to be curious and discover stuff and let life happen when, you know, the better advice might be to work hard, to add skills, and to look at the person to your left and come in an hour before them and look at the person on your right and stay an hour later than them and just work harder. That worked for me, made me super successful. I'm super happy with that deal. I mean, I worked 25% harder than my peers and I got 10 times further, maybe 1,000 times further than some peers. So it's just a choice you have to make. If you want to run the marathon in under 4 hours, you can do that. If you want to walk the marathon in 10 hours, you can do that. But it takes two different sets of sacrifice. To run the marathon in 4 hours, you got to train. To walk a marathon in 10 hours, you have to walk for 10 hours. It's not a big deal. You're basically walking 2 miles an hour.
Great analogy. So, if we treat the next decade as a marathon of opportunity for investments, for founders, I know you're keen on continuously growing and expanding, and that hustle is evident. Which industries, which verticals really stand out to you? I know you actively talk about this elsewhere, but what are you truly focused on right now?
I'm vertical agnostic and I always think about the process. So I'm constantly looking at the process of investing and saying, how can I make our process better? So one of the key things I realized was I had so many people coming to want to do business with me, as you know, in terms of being on their cap table and giving them money, that I couldn't keep up. And you really, my inbox is filled with billion-dollar startups I never responded to. Once in a while, I'll go to invite somebody on the podcast from a very successful company, and there's a DM from them on Twitter saying, "Hey, I'd like to tell you about my company." And it's like, oh God, this is before they even launched it. So today I have about 5 researchers and associates. I have exactly 5 who I forward these incoming emails in to do an introductory call. Those introductory calls then at least explain to those people how we work and we understand their business deeply. And then those all come back to me every day, all day long. And people signal to me, we gotta do a deeper dive on this one, or we need to invest in this one. And so I'm trying to build the infrastructure and the process so I don't miss great things. That's my own personal challenge. Other investors have different challenges. You know, their challenges might be raising their fund. Their challenge might be founders even knowing who they are. So they might be at a different stage. I'm blessed because of the podcast and because of my writing and the book to have a lot of deal flow. So then it becomes the curse of not being able to get through the deal flow and get back to everybody. So, you know, we all have our different challenges. And so for me, it's all about process. I don't really worry about the definition of and the category of the startup, because the best investments I ever made came from categories that had yet to be defined. When I invested in Uber, the concept of on demand didn't exist. On demand was a term that was created by some analyst somewhere to describe Uber, Lyft, and Postmates and DoorDash. Then when we invested in Calm.com, which is the second best investment we ever did, and will eventually become the top investment, I believe, because we own a much bigger percentage of it, 50, 60 times what we owned in Uber. You know, that company, to do a consumer subscription app, well, we invested in that company before iTunes offered subscriptions, and the App Store didn't have subscriptions. You could only buy an app for $10. You didn't have reoccurring revenue. So that one predated consumer subscription as a title, right? And when we invested in Robinhood, the idea of, you know, retail investors and, you know, this new finance category, it didn't exist either. So we are very agnostic to that. We invested in a beverage company this year. We invested in jewelry companies. We'll take a risk on anything. We don't think like other investors in terms of, you know, some firms are focused on SaaS, some are marketplaces, some are consumer. We just want to crush it on meeting as many as possible and backing as many as possible. And when they do hit product market fit, we want a 10x, right? our investment. And that's why we have an accelerator, the launch accelerator. We put $100,000 bet into those companies. The ones that break out, we'll put another $5 million into them 50 times.
It's incredible. Commend you for your work. And Jason, I'll say this before we let all of our guests off the hook, we always put them through the hot seat. So I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions. We'll keep this fun, but I'll ask you 3 specific questions. So are you ready?
I am ready.
Let's do this. All right. So Jason, you're from Brooklyn. And if you and I, not that we're going to do this, but if we had a chance to hop on a jet, go to New York, we go to Times Square, and you were given an infinite budget to write whatever you want in Times Square, what would you write as a message to the world?
Do the work.
Love it.
Yep.
That's
what the sign says right there. Do the work. Now that sign, everybody gets to see it, when they watch the podcast or whatever, but I get to see it every time I walk into the office to remind me how I got here. It's just doing the work.
Simple and beautiful. Second question for you. This is hopefully a spicier one. It was actually asked by somebody on Twitter. Her name's Janet Yen. And essentially, we want to know if you had to spend the rest of time with one of the besties from the All In podcast on an island, who would it be?
Wow. On an island with one of the besties. That's really hard. I don't know if I can answer that question, but let's see. I'm going to think through it. I'm not going to do rapid fire. I'm going to think through it. Number one, Chamath and I laugh a ton and goof off, and we're both extroverts. So we'd probably drive each other mad. Friedberg, I know least of the other two. I've spent the least amount of time with. I've spent a lot of time with him. And he's the most science-based. So that might be more interesting because I don't know him as well, but it could also be disastrous. But he also knows a lot of science, so that could be becoming crafty. And then, Sax and I always have a blowout fun time. He's a bit introverted and Aspergery, i.e. Rain Man. And so we actually complement each other nicely. So there would be an argument to go with Sax because we complement each other nicely. But I think I'm going to say the better question is, who would you want in a zombie apocalypse? Because you want to have people who are survivors. And I could see Friedberg being very, very, very good I could see Friedberg being perfect for a zombie apocalypse because he might have that like introvert strength and he also is very resourceful. I could see Sax being somebody who's just a good, complimentary person on the island. And then in terms of like owning a sports team together or going out for like a crazy weekend, me and Chamath maybe. So I don't know. Each bestie, one of the great things about besties is they complement each other in different places. But also, you know what? Chamath would be good in a zombie apocalypse too. One of the things about the besties is they're very complementary. So it's almost like the Fantastic Four or the X-Men or something like that. Everybody's got a different purpose. Sometimes you send in the Thing to just knock a wall down. Other times you need, Mrs. Fantastic who can be invisible, or Mr. Fantastic to reach over and grab something, or you need Johnny Flame. Like everybody's got a different purpose on the team, right? So it's just, I can't answer it, definitively.
I love that expansive response. It sounds like maybe instead of a media company for the All In podcast, you should have a superhero movie. Question number 3 is, I'm a huge proponent of constantly learning. So if you had to learn a brand new topic outside of investing, what would it be?
Right there. That electric guitar, the Fender. I would want to, I would want to learn how to play guitar like Mark Knopfler.
Awesome.
Someday.
Still can do it. You got plenty of time.
Still can do it. Still have times. Yeah, my friend told me that. You got plenty of time. Do it. I was like,
you got a whole life ahead of you. Jason, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Sorry about the power going out last time.
Hey,
that was crazy.
Fun. It's going to make a hell of a story. Thanks, Jason.
All right. Take care, brother. Be cool.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.